Hello, hello. I am back with a recap of my round 5 game from my most recent event, the 2025 Maia Open, which took place in Porto, Portugal last month, August. So, of course, going into this game, I had just come off another very difficult loss, and entering the second half of the tournament, I was on 2 out of 4. So I talked about this in my last recap video, but basically, from this point on, it was all about the mindset game for me, is just like trying to figure out whether I still know how to play chess and whether I could try and bounce back from the really, really rough start. What I tried to do was consider the last 5 games of the tournament as a fresh event on its own, just a 5-round event where I could just start from scratch and try to have a good performance. Because again, the Maia Open wasn't going to be my last tournament ever, so even if it continued to go very roughly for me, I could still try to learn from the games and have a lot of material to work with over the next coming months as I try to continue to make progress. So I think I was more or less able to recover. Like, I still showed up to the game in a relatively decent mood. I think it's always easier to do when you play white after a loss, because you feel like, okay, you have good chances to bounce back. So for this round 5 game, I did not get a great pairing. I was paired against an Italian junior rated 2071, Gabriele Rossi. And I met Gabriel actually at the previous Maia Open and hung out with him a bit, so I know he's like very motivated, like very dedicated youngster. So exactly the last opponent you want to play when you're not having a good tournament is like a promising kid essentially. So I decided to repeat the English opening that I played in round 3. It kind of went well in round 3, and I said, you know what, let's keep it solid. And maybe he won't expect me to repeat c4 again. I wasn't sure, but I thought, yeah, this is the right choice for this game. So he goes knight f6, knight c3, and now c5. So back to the symmetrical English. I went g3 and now d5. And here I took on d5, knight takes d5, bishop g2. This is all pretty standard, and black went knight b6. So I knew that knight c7 is the more popular move. I didn't know by how much or whether knight b6 is played or not, but I assumed it was playable. But yeah, I think knight c7 is the right move here. If you imagine, black is pretty quickly going to play knight c6 and then e5, and essentially we get like a reverse Rossi bind structure where white is playing accelerated dragon kind of setup. And in the Rossi bind, white's knight is often well placed on c2 if it needs to retreat. The knight, would rather go to c2 than to b3. So analogously, here I think the knight should go to c7 instead of b6. But I didn't know exactly how to react to this one, so I started thinking here for a bit, and eventually I played this move, e3. And this was basically just a matter of prep against knight c7. I also wanted to play this setup with e3 and knight e2. Of course, white has many ways to play. You can play like knight f3 and d3. This is more normal, but I thought e3 and knight e2 is kind of an interesting way to handle this. And so on knight b6, I decided let's just stick with that setup, though of course white could also play just normally here, knight f3, d3. It's kind of like a reverse dragon, and interesting position for both sides. Nevertheless, I went e3, knight c6, knight e2, and here black goes e5. I thought my opponent was spending a lot of time here. I thought he might be thinking about this move knight to b4, which feels tempting. And I wasn't actually sure how I would deal with this one. I think most likely I would have played d4. Because if white castles, then knight d3 looks kind of annoying. Although Stockfish thinks that this is totally fine for white to just give the bishop, just play knight f4. And because black has spent so many moves capturing the bishop on c1, white is just having a big advantage here. So this actually would be quite nice for white. But yeah, during the game I wasn't sure. I was thinking more about d4 takes, and pawn takes d4. But then black could play bishop f5, trying for knight c2 or knight d3, and I thought it's, to my eyes it wasn't clear. I was thinking I might have to play knight e4 here. As it turns out, once again, engine super strong. It says castles, knight c2, rook to b1. On knight b4, I don't mind the exchange sacrifice. So white has a lot of moves here. White can take on b7, white can go even bishop f4, and apparently just have huge compensation here for the exchange. So that was not on my radar at all during the game, but kind of interesting. So in any case, black played the more normal move e5, and here I played castles, bishop e7, and f4. And this is kind of the idea of white's setup, is to put the knight on e2 and play f4. And there's similar ideas in like the accelerated dragon as well, as effectively this is the structure that we have. And it's kind of a nice funky setup. Like white wants to get the knight to f4, and then the two knights and the bishop are really well coordinated here. We hit the d5 square with a lot of pieces, and white's second bishop will go either to b2 or to a3 to put pressure on the c pawn. So it's very like flexible, harmonious setup that I was kind of happy to get in the game. And here black takes on f4, which I think actually is a mistake because it just kind of helps me improve my knight. And probably black should have just castled here. And I'm really not interested in winning a pawn with takes on c6 and fe because my light squares would just be way too weak, and black is already doing great here. Instead, I would most likely just, after castles, probably play b3, followed by either bishop b2, bishop a3, rook c1, knight e4, put pressure on the c pawn, and this is kind of the main plan. And here's where the knight on b6 has been misplaced, because black at some point would like to put the pawn on b6 to cover the c pawn, and that's why knight on would be better on c7 here, I believe. But anyway, this is still very normal, like f6, and game continues again, bishop b2, bishop a3, maybe white has a small edge. After ef4, knight f4, I already started to like my position quite a bit. So castles, I go b3, just kind of following the setup. And here black goes bishop f6. And it feels like quite a normal move at first, just putting the bishop on this diagonal, and then after bishop to b2, black might have like knight b4, knight d3 ideas, or basically just kind of putting pressure along the pin, maybe some c4 somewhere. But then I quickly realized I also have this idea to play bishop a3, which eventually I decided on, because I thought actually it's pretty strong to just start putting pressure on this pawn right away, and invite black to take on c3, where after dc3, my e-pawn will be very weak, but my dark square bishop will be incredibly strong. And I felt like that was going to be in white's favor. And otherwise, it's not so easy for black to defend the pawn. Definitely black doesn't want to go back with knight d7 or bishop e7. So the other move here would be knight to b4 if black doesn't want to take on c3. But then I think I had rook c1 in mind, followed by knight e4. And here I felt like I have a really pleasant game. And yeah, black is going to have a hard time defending the pawn on c5. White is just putting massive pressure here. So yeah, I think bishop f6 was another kind of inaccuracy or mistake, and now after bishop a3, white now has a big advantage. Probably black should have just developed the other bishop, like bishop f5, and then I'd go either bishop b2 or bishop a3. And yeah, again, white is doing well, but it's still very much a game. Black can yeah, continue developing. But bishop f6, bishop a3, now my opponent spent a little bit of time here, another 10 minutes, and takes on c3. I went dc, and yeah, ultimately I was happy to play this position. So queen e7, now white has a lot of options. I could go e4 here. I was thinking about queen h5, just kind of developing. Eventually I decided on king h1, as I felt like I was more than happy to give up the e-pawn, because I felt like I would have a lot of compensation there. And on queen h5, I thought it wasn't totally clear. First, black could play knight e5, and then kind of hit me with bishop to g4, so that I would have to do something about, like play h3. But also I wasn't totally sure on queen takes e3, king h1, exactly what's going on here. I definitely felt like white should have more than enough for the pawn. Like c pawn is weak, and white is doing really well in development. But I wasn't 100% sure how good this was compared to my other options, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to just sack a pawn like that if I didn't need to. So I ended up going king h1, and here on queen takes e3, I could play queen h5 again if I decided that was the right thing, but actually I had this kind of interesting move in mind, queen e1, where essentially black is forced to trade queens. I take with the a rook, and now the c pawn is hard to defend, but if black doesn't defend it, then I just get my pawn back, two bishops, open board, like better development. White just has a crushing endgame. But if black has to play something like knight d7, then I thought, okay, for sure I have great compensation here for the pawn, because black just isn't developing. I can go like knight d5 here, c4, like start doubling rooks. Like I think white has a lot of moves. It's just very difficult for black to untangle here, because yeah, how do you play b6 without dropping the knight? So I was more than happy to enter that endgame, but instead black played rook d8, which is probably more practical move. And now once again, my first thought would be queen h5, but then knight e5 bothered me, and I have to cover this g4 square, and I realized maybe my queen isn't that well placed on h5, although to me this is like a supernatural move, activating and hitting the c-pawn. Then I realized queen e2 is just a much better square for the queen. I defend the pawn, but also I look at queen to b5, which is surprisingly difficult for black to deal with. I also have an idea to play just knight d3, go after the pawn. So if black were to play a6, then I could definitely consider the move knight d3 here, and just immediately chasing this one. Can also just like, let's say, bring the rook in, or c4 first to get the d5 square, and yeah, I think white has a big edge here. So instead, black played knight e5, and after a very long thing, so 20 minutes. So at this point, my opponent is really getting into severe time pressure because it's only move 15, so he has to make 25 more moves, and he has 16 or almost 17 minutes left on the clock. And so that's really not enough in like complex middle game like this. So I was definitely feeling very confident that I should be able to win this because I'm better on the board and much better on the clock. But of course, I had some of my recent failures in mind, and I wanted to just really make sure that I don't give my opponent any chances. Well, knight e5, I thought for a bit and played queen to b5. And yeah, earlier I got in trouble going pawn grabbing, but here, once again, I didn't see the issue of going after this pawn, so I decided to do it. If black were to defend now knight d7, it's just very passive and unpleasant, so I can go rook d1, knight d5, and white is just doing fantastic here. Probably just go rook d1. And I am threatening to take on c5 because of tactics on the d file. So now the threat is like bishop c5, knight c5, rook d8, queen d8, queen takes c5 with an extra pawn for white. So my opponent didn't want to go into that. Instead, he goes knight to g4. And now at this point, black is under 5 minutes. I had 52 minutes, but I really wanted to just have the cleanest technique that I possibly could, just not to allow any chances. So I made sure not to rush, and I started calculating. Because now white has a lot of options. I could take on c5 with the bishop, I can take on c5 with the queen, I can maybe play rook e1 just to cover the e-pawn that black is targeting. And they all kind of look tempting. Bishop c5 I quickly rejected in view of queen g5. Here I thought, okay, probably it's not that dangerous, but now black's pieces are getting closer to the king side, and I don't want to allow counter chances if I don't have to. Although objectively, this is probably totally fine for white, but it's just a little annoying. I'm pinned on the b file on the 5th rank, and yeah, black has this queen h6 thing. And on queen takes c5, I thought black would play queen takes e3, and I wasn't totally sure how good this is. I assumed white should be better here, like in the endgame, but of course I don't really want to take because then knight e3 and black wins one of my bishops. Here black would actually be, I think, totally fine. So queen c5, queen takes e3, basically we need another move. And yeah, I think I probably considered rook e1, but then black has knight f2 check. So I think I pretty much rejected it in view of this line, because now black doesn't have smothered mate, because we'll take with the queen, or with the rook, but can make a perpetual check like this, because on knight f2 I can't take, because if queen takes e1, I lose the exchange. So I have to go king g1, and then knight h3 is forces king h1, because it's double check. So I remember seeing this line and being like, ooh, definitely don't want to draw. I think white has other moves here, like h3 apparently is good here for white, but it wasn't quite on my radar during this calculation. At least not in queen takes c5, queen takes e3. So then I started looking at another move, h3 first. And I thought this is kind of clever because on h3, knight takes e3, I could just pin the knight with rook fe1. Or start with bishop takes c5. I think both might be good. Bishop c5 and then just moving the rook. So h3 I quickly started to like, because if black is forced to go backwards, then I can just take the pawn for free. And the main thing I was starting to calculate is like queen takes e3, because I thought with my opponent not having enough time, he might just go for it and sacrifice a piece like this. Because if I take the knight, queen takes g3, I felt like this should be good for white, like it shouldn't be enough for black, but he is going to win the pawn on g4 and then just have 3 pawns on the king side. My king is empty. While I thought it should still be very, very good for white, I wasn't sure how good, if it's like winning or just big advantage. And yeah, it definitely felt like way messier than I would have liked. So on queen e3, I wanted to find a different solution, and at first I was very tempted by just rook a1. I thought this was game over. Because if the queen moves, it's rook e8 with a back rank checkmate. If knight f2, I have king h2, and again, rook e8 is game over. But then I realized black has bishop d7 here. And it wasn't so clear. If I take on e3, takes on b5, I take here, takes on f1, takes on f1. Okay, I have two pieces for the rook. Should be big advantage for white. Black has rook and pawn for the two bishops. So definitely great winning chances for white, but yeah, I was starting to feel like this would be a bit of a longer conversion than I would like. So I was looking for something more clear on queen takes e3, and eventually I landed on this funny line, rook f3, where now if, let's say, the queen moves, then I'm just taking the knight and keeping the king side. So I thought knight f2 check is kind of critical. Then I could go king h2 here, but what I looked at was king to g1, keeping an attack on the knight, allowing knight takes h3, now king h2. So the queen is still hit, the knight is still hit. I thought black's only chance here is queen d2, pinning the bishop, where on knight takes h3, if I try to get the extra piece, black has bishop takes h3. King h3, queen h6 check, and actually I'm in trouble because my king is forced to go for a walk. But on queen d2, I saw that I have this funny move, rook d3. Where if black takes on d3, then of course it's back rank, and otherwise I'm hitting the rook and the queen. Black does have bishop d7, but then I'm just taking too much material here. Takes, I trade rooks, and I take on h3 with something. And I got a piece for 2 pawns, and it's really not enough because black doesn't have any passed pawns yet, and yeah, my bishops are very, very strong. So, of course, white has other options. Looking at the engine, it's very funny because it's almost every move is winning for white after queen takes. I could take here, I could take here. This is good. But during the game, I just wanted to be very, very sure that I have something concrete and that I know exactly what I'm doing. Because when the opponent doesn't have a lot of time, they're put in this desperate situation. They're more likely, I think, to sacrifice something or do something dynamic because they know they need to try something to have some chances. So I thought there's a very real possibility that black could enter this line, and I wanted to be ready. The line I calculated with rook f3, maybe not objectively best according to Compy, but was kind of good enough. I think it was all working. In any case, after h3, my opponent quickly blitzed out knight f6. After the game, he just said oh, I just trusted you. I just trusted you that knight e3, queen e3, nothing was working. So fair enough. I ended up spending 28 minutes on h3. That's how determined I was not to mess this one up, given how the tournament had gone. And knight f6 was played in 4 seconds. Okay, but now I can take on c5 and not really worry about a lot of stuff. Now it's just a clear extra pawn for white. So I took on c5 pretty quickly here, and black went for the endgame. Definitely he should have just played queen e8, for better or worse, just to keep queens on the board. It's a little bit awkward for me with my queen and bishop. I still have this e-pawn to defend. Okay, white has a huge advantage. There's a lot of moves here. I can go king h2 at e4 with rook e1 idea, or on knight e4, queen e3, and then rook e1 and just kind of barreling down the king side. Queen e7 maybe is a safe choice, just kind of insisting on the queen trade. I might have gone for this one in the game just to make sure that we get a too pleasant endgame for white. But anyways, I think that's definitely what black should have done. Instead, he traded on c5. Bishop takes c5. Of course, at this point, black is in major time trouble, so it's hard to really question any of his moves at this point. And bishop f5. So bishop f5 is a good find because if bishop takes b7, black has a nice trick with bishop e4 check. Takes knight e4, and all of a sudden white is losing some material here. Or I guess I would have to take here, but then a takes b6, and this is still hanging, and black has rook d2, and just tons and tons of counterplay for the 2 pawns. So here black is actually doing basically okay. But bishop f5, I saw I already have bishop e7, which I think is just much simpler solution. If the rook comes down to d2, let's say, I'm just going to take on f6, gf6, and now I have an extra pawn. I can take on b7. I have knight h5. So I thought yeah, black's activity here is real. It shouldn't be enough. It's just white has tons of compensation of their own. And on bishop e7 instead, knight e4 was played, which is a sharp try, like trying to play for knight takes g3, but it just doesn't work for black. So I had enough time to kind of figure this one out. And I took on d8, knight takes g3 check, king to g1, very important not to allow knight takes f1 with check. And here it's basically over. My opponent actually resigned because he realized he's just losing too much material. Because if knight takes rook, for example, I bishop takes b6, defending this one, a takes b6, I take the knight, and I'm just up a clear piece. So black should go rook takes d8 as the best chance, but then white's just up a full exchange here, and black doesn't really have any compensation whatsoever because all of white's pieces are good. I can go rook fd1, rook ad1. Black shouldn't trade, and then rook e1 here, rook f3, rook f. Basically, any move here is fine for white, and there's still maybe a little bit of technical work to do, but yeah, objectively it's completely winning, and there's not much hope for black because white's rooks are completely open, and b7 is weak. I have c4, like knight on b6 is still not great. So basically, black just has no compensation for the exchange, and yeah, decided to just call it a day. Which is a little surprising, but I understood because, yeah, I don't think, basically if the two roles were flipped, I don't think I'd be saving the position on black side either, basically. So I was very happy with this game because I felt like I played a really clean game. I don't think it was like perfect according to the computer, but I felt like all my moves made sense and I found a lot of nice ideas. And it was my first time actually playing the setup with white, but it seemed to go very smoothly, especially on the clock, because I felt like one of the biggest factors was just black was spending so much time in the middle game and early opening trying to figure out what to do here that he wasn't able to later deal with any kind of like the concrete stuff when time would become really important. So after this game I was on 3 out of 5, and once again hoping to turn it around, though of course the next day, round 6, I would again have black, and I would need to figure out what I'm doing with the black pieces. But all right, thanks for watching this recap. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Take care.